right, it is that time of year again. I'm going to fast 2,996 minutes in remembrance of all we lost 20 years ago this week. I was just watching a news segment about one of the ticketing agents who had let in two late passengers that morning, and they turned out to be the hijackers of Flight 77. And he lived with that for many years. He had also helped his friend book a ticket on Flight 77 the previous day, so he really lived with it for several years. Um, Let me talk about what I was doing on the morning of 9/11, because I remember it vividly. I was going to college part-time, and we had gone into the financial aid office, but everybody seemed to be busy with something. And then one of my favorite professors runs down the hall and says, "Did you hear what happened on the news?" And when he mentioned the World Trade Center, I thought that he was talking about the event several years earlier where there was a car bombing. I thought he was talking about that. It was an anniversary or a remembrance of some sort. Maybe they had executed the people involved. I thought that was what he was talking about. And it took a while for us to digest what had just happened. Now, what was really funny was obviously the classes for the rest of the day were canceled, but my mom, who was driving me to the campus, on her way home, she went to a Joann Fabrics to take her mind off of that stuff. And I thought that was kind of silly at the time, but I've had other big events in my life, nothing as dramatic as 9/11, where I did silly things to take my mind off of things. I'll talk about some of those events in this video. Leave a comment if you remember what you were doing that morning, and I'll talk about some of my other flashbulb memories. My earliest flashbulb memory was probably when I was in second grade. One day, we were in class when the teacher had, another teacher had come into our classroom to whisper something to our teacher, and both of them were on the verge of tears. And our teacher didn't want to talk about what was going on. We thought it might have just been a personal issue, right? A death in her family, some kind of problem, maybe her kids getting in trouble, who knows, right? We didn't think it was a national event. It wasn't until we saw other people who were saddened by it, and later that night my parents explained that there had been a bombing in Oklahoma. And I didn't know what bombing really was. You know, we saw pictures from the TV, but I just knew a lot of people had died, a lot of destruction. Didn't know it was an intentional act, right? We thought it might have been like an earthquake or something. And only years later did I connect the dots. You know, what was our teacher talking about that morning? So that was the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, a few years after that, we were all preparing for the end of the world on Y2K. And I remember my family hoarding a lot of food. We didn't hoard toilet paper, though. We hoarded a lot of dried food, canned food. My mom was 7 months pregnant at the time. And I remember toward the end of 99, we were eating out a lot. For two reasons. Number one, my mom felt guilty that all the attention was on her pregnancy, and she wanted to make that up to me. I remember there were several weeks where we would eat out like almost every night, and second, we didn't know if the end of the world was coming. I think that was part of the reason as well, and plus the economy was doing really well at the time. Right, we had budget surpluses, we were irrationally exuberant. And then the clock hit 12, and I thought the reason we had hoarded all that canned food was to kind of celebrate, right? Clock hits 12, we're all gonna feast, right? And I said, "Come on, let's go feast." And my parents just thought that was so funny. We did have a little bit of a feast, but not the kind of feast that I was thinking of. I was thinking something on the order of the guy who ate like 50 hot dogs in like a few minutes, right? I used to love doing that, by the way. Up until 2 years ago, I wanted to be a competitive eater. I got into a little trouble with eating behaviors like that, and kind of changed course. So that was Y2K. and then we got 9/11, which I just talked about. I developed a big fear of flying, as I'm sure a lot of people did after 9/11. And the following year, my family and I had gone to Taiwan. We had we had to visit a family member who was ill, and I had a big meltdown on both ways of that trip. And I told my mom I'm never gonna fly again. And my mom was so upset at that remark because at the time 3 of our grandparents were alive, and she mentioned, don't you think it's your obligation to go visit or go to at least go to their funerals? So you got to fly 3 more times. That's what my mom said. And I said, well, that's all right, because by the time they pass away, we'll probably have, a bridge across the Bering Strait. I could drive to Taiwan. And my dad said, that's even more dangerous. You're not even going to make 1 trip. He's a chemical engineer, so he would know. And he was right about that. And then I said, well, maybe instead of driving there, maybe one day the flight to Taiwan will be so fast, right? Take an hour or so, and I won't have time to get scared. And my dad acknowledged, well, that's possible. That's an improvement over driving there for sure. And so my grandparents were relatively healthy. I thought they would live long enough to see the day that we could fly there in an hour, because then I wouldn't have time to get scared. And we left it at that. Well, unfortunately, a little over a year after 9/11, one day we had turned on the news, and it was a Saturday morning when one of those machines that could fly to Taiwan in an hour also crashed. And I remember that day vividly because I used to love watching unsolved mysteries. And I used to have a big fear of seeing a UFO. I would go outside at night and I would worry that I would look up and see a UFO. And for some reason, the night before Columbia crashed, I had been watching Unsolved Mysteries, and there was a segment about UFOs, and I couldn't sleep that night thinking that there was going to be a UFO. And the next morning we turned on the news, and sure enough, a UFO crashed. So that was kind of remembered for that reason. Now in 2008, my first year working on my PhD, I started collecting silver coins. I used to love foreign silver coins because a lot of them were going for below the spot price. God, I can't find a quiet place. Give me a second. So I was collecting a lot of foreign silver coins. And one day I had gone to the coin dealer and silver prices had crashed, fallen about $2 or $3 an ounce within the space of 48 hours. And I got really excited. I naively thought, I just started collecting coins at the time, and I naively gave the dealer my credit card, say, okay, I'll buy all these. It was about $600-700, and I didn't want to go get cash at the ATM. So I just handed him my credit card, and he gives me this funniest look ever, like, we don't accept credit cards. I was riding 18-speed bicycle, and I race all around town to look for ATMs that will allow me to withdraw that much and to get the coins. And I get back to the campus celebrating, and I wanted to brag about how cheaply I had gotten all those coins for. When I got back to the campus, it's so silly. You don't think of having a quiet environment for a YouTube video is such a challenge until you actually go and try it. I get back to the campus, and I see 2 of my professors talking to each other about this disaster that was going on. And I was still bragging about the silver coins, and my PhD advisor was so upset at me because that's all I wanted to talk about. And she said, did you hear what happened on the news today? And I said, no, what happened? And she was like, the economy is crashing. So that was September of 2008. Actually, coming out here and not having a quiet place is a good reminder to never take anything for granted, right? What you think is a trivial matter, it becomes very valuable when you realize you don't have it, right? Actually, that's a very good metaphor. That was 2008. I was traveling in Taiwan 3 years later. I had a conference paper on my PhD work, and all of a sudden I learned that one of the masterminds for what happened 20 years ago this week had finally been executed. Osama bin Laden. Kind of remember exactly where I was sitting in that conference room when I first saw the news story. We thought it might not have been real, you know. We thought that maybe we were mistaken. So that takes us to 2011. And then we had a number of peaceful years without too many of these flashbulb memories. So one day, I used to live out of my car for several seasons every year. I would move in somewhere during the winter time, but live in my car during the rest of the year. I had a favorite coffee shop that I would hang out at. And one day I had gone to the coffee shop and they had taken away every other chair in that shop, and there was this buzzword. We had to follow social distancing. It was the first time I ever heard that word. I think it was invented during the SARS-1 pandemic, but it was the first time I ever seriously heard that word uttered. It was a very upsetting phrase to me at the beginning, though, because you gotta understand where I was a year and a half ago. I was still looking for a potential future business partner to get the computer games I'm writing off the ground, right? And so when I heard we had to practice social distancing, it was almost like somebody had said F you to me, right? I mean, I understood why we were doing it, but the phrase really hurt. I wish they had a better phrase besides social distancing, right? And then after I leave the coffee shop, I get in my car and I hear on the radio, every station I turn on to was COVID-19, You couldn't get away from the news about it. Actually, I think at the time they called it a novel coronavirus. I don't think the word COVID-19 had been coined yet. And we were hearing about the markets tanking. And I'm an opportunist. When I hear a market's tanking, I'm thinking, what am I going to buy? So I check the stock market, I checked the foreign stock market, and then I realized silver had crashed to $12 and platinum had crashed to 500 something. I wanted so badly to buy actually I could have bought 20 ounces of platinum where it was, and I wanted so badly to, but everybody was sold out. They couldn't guarantee the price. So I ended up buying a 1,000-ounce silver bar. And then later that night I checked into an Airbnb because I realized that I couldn't live out of coffee shops over the next couple of weeks. So I booked the Airbnb for I think 2 or 3 weeks. And I continued to look for the silver. Now, the following day, the coin dealer I was working with, it was US Gold Bureau, by the way, they called me and had to verify all this stuff, old tax returns and all that, and I'm frantically digging through my car to look for them, which gave me a nice opportunity to clean out my car, so it was very nice. Finally, I confirm all that stuff, and now the silver bar is going to take like a month to come, and everybody's talking about getting their stimulus and all that. Just before the pandemic hit, I had seriously corrected some bad habits in my life, and now I had all this extra money in my pocket. I remember thinking I had already given myself a stimulus. What stimulus are you guys talking about? Didn't say it out loud, but that was what was going through my head. And then I settled in, and I ended up living in that first Airbnb for 3 months, which I got a very good deal on because the landlord couldn't have increased the rent. We had an eviction moratorium. So those are the big flashbulb memories in my life. I hope not to have too many of them in the coming years because, as you can see, I try to make light of all these situations, but behind them was a lot of tragedy.